With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
What say you, Richard Alex Murdaugh? Are you guilty or not guilty of the felonies wherein you stand indicted?
Not guilty.
How shall you be tried?
By God and my country.
The exact time when Paul and Maggie Murdaugh were murdered.
At the end of the investigation, it was obvious.
I'm not here to work with them, okay?
And the whole point is to have this not fall into the wrong hands. This case is unique, it's unprecedented in South Carolina history.
Welcome to Unsolved South Carolina, the Murdaugh Murders, Money and Mystery. We are here at our CIV studio with our exclusive legal analyst, Charlie Condon, the former South Carolina Attorney General. We're also here with Drew Tripp, our executive producer. Max Harrison is behind the scenes. He is running the boards and keeping our production together. We have this opportunity today to talk about an interview that we did with the three deputies from the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, Captain Jason Chapman, Detective Laura Rutland, and now Detective Daniel Greene. Sat down with myself, Tara Jabor, and Sam Griswold, who's our photojournalist, and Drew Tripp was there as well. It was so enlightening. It was so candid. We have been able to play back some of this long interview we did. They sat down with us for nearly 2 hours.
Wow.
Charlie wasn't with us, but this is our opportunity to share some of these clips because I think for me, what was so candid and frank about this conversation, besides the fact we have not heard from these detectives and this captain in this way, they came after hours, off the clock, in their street clothes, to a cafe in Walterboro to sit down and really explain to us what not only happened, as they approached the double murder scene and had to digest all that was happening there, but what has transpired over the last 2 years. Absolutely fascinating. And Drew, you were able to be a part of that. And this just happened two nights ago.
It was terrific. The insight we got and the questions we got answered, the lingering questions that I feel like we got answered. We just sat down a week ago and did an update on the trial and tried to address some of those lingering unanswered questions. And so much of that was centered around law enforcement. And the big one, the defense made such a big deal, the Murdaugh's defense lawyers made such a big deal about trying to impugn and criticize the way the investigation was handled by local law enforcement, the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, and also by SLED, the state police agency. And immediately after the fact, okay, the burning questions for me is like, what's legitimate, what's not legitimate? Because you know that there's going to be some hyperbole, right, with the defense, and they're going to frame things in a certain way to make their case look a little bit better. And you want to hear from law enforcement about, okay, what in there do you take seriously, and what was that hyperbole? And we didn't initially get the chance to get any reaction to that from SLED, but the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, they can give us that same, nearly the same level of insight because we learned this week, they're intimately involved. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just with the initial investigation when they say they turned it over to SLED, they were still involved. And they really went blow by blow and logically took apart some of the criticisms and things that we heard through this trial. And it was just terrific. Again, and you're going to hear some of that now. It's really, really enlightening, and we can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I kind of want to get into it. But first, Charlie, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We're certainly going to be hoping to bring you more exclusive to be announced interviews that we're going to be doing as we go through post-trial right now. But of course, there's so much more that we can talk about. Once again, the Colleton County Sheriff's Office. We're going to go ahead and play one of the first clips. And if y'all are watching this on streaming, you'll be able to watch this video as well. Right now, you'll be hearing it in the audio for the podcast.
Never seen this guy before. I didn't remember ever seeing him on the news or anything like that. Even with the whole boat crash thing, like I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that news story, so it's not like I remembered him from that. But as soon as he mentioned the boat crash theory to me, it clicked. Okay, that's who this is. That's this family.
That was Detective Daniel Greene. He was the first responding officer on the scene, the first person to walk up to Alex Murdaugh to see what was happening at this crime scene, to see the bodies of Paul and Maggie. That was the body cam that we obviously heard so much about. But, initially he said he really didn't know where he was. He knew that he was on Moselle on the road. He knew the address, but he really didn't know who Alec was.
Mm-hmm. Did it ring a bell with him once he heard about the boat crash, or it still was sort of vague to him?
That's what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying he was starting to remember some of the details about this boat crash and what had transpired. But as far as it's extraordinary, actually, because I think it was within 10 or 11 seconds of that body camera rolling and him coming up onto Alex Murdaugh. Alec immediately mentions.
Yes, and I thought that really hurt the defendant by bringing up such a motivation for the murder so early on, because it tied in nicely to the defense's theory of why he committed these murders relative to the motive evidence. But by the way, congratulations on getting these officers together. That is an amazing bit of journalism there, because I think when you have folks together like that, the information you can get is insightful.
And I think they were feeding it on off of each other as well, remembering details, and then the other one would be able to pick it up too. I definitely got the impression that these detectives and Captain Chapman had spent an inordinate amount of time working through these details and remembering through watching that body cam.
Right. Did you have the feeling from them that they were a little bit, I shouldn't use this word, probably a bit too strong, smarting from the criticism of law enforcement investigation, or were they kind of past that and felt comfortable talking about it?
They were perturbed.
They were.
That was that was the whole impetus for this. And they made that point clear. SLED's not going to talk. SLED's not allowed to talk. But we're here to be candid and frank with you. And they made clear also, like, hey, SLED has a field office in Walterboro. We know these people. We work with these people. I see. There are certain things that, and we're so grateful to them that they've been given, Captain Jason Chapman, Sheriff Buddy Hill, they were given leeway to come and explain to us and say to us and give us the insight that we're not going to get anywhere else, and that law enforcement perspective of what's legitimate and what's not. But they were certainly perturbed. They were aggravated. It wasn't. They know the deal. They know the game. They've been on the stand. They've all done this before. They know it's not personal.
Right.
But that's such a odd thing. Growing up, the longer you work, the longer your career is. Well, it's not personal. It's just a job. But it's hard for it not to be personal, right? When you put the amount of time.
Family and friends that probably ask some questions. Did you have the feeling? It sounds like the Attorney General's office decided in the presentation of their case and direct examination and redirect or cross-examination that some of these details in explaining law enforcement conduct, they just didn't want to get into it because I guess they felt like it didn't hurt them in the presentation of their case. Because what I'm hearing from you all, we'll talk about this more fully, that there are a number of explanations as to why things weren't done, the booties and the fingerprints were collected. The fact that the state did not present that in their case for explanation Is it a trial strategy that they thought, well, there's no sense spending time on that because it's not really hurting us? Or what do you think the reasoning would be as to why this information is now being presented?
Well, I think that this information, it was, well, first of all, such a complex case. And it was my impression that it was a little bit of, we need to pick our battles. And we need to figure out exactly where we need to go with this stuff.
Right. That's typical.
And like you said, if it's going to hurt the case, then absolutely we need to spend more time on it. But just talking to them, there were a million little details that would never made it to the stand or as evidence. But cleared it up for me.
I see. Yeah, and it's hard to argue with a 3-hour jury verdict after a 6-week trial, right? I mean, it's really hard to argue with that. So the strategy obviously was an appropriate one.
Well, and absolutely, I think, with all fingers and toes crossed as well, like when you start making those decisions, that must be really hard as a prosecutor.
It is. You've got to, on both sides. I'm sure the defense, looking back, there are lots of decisions they might have done differently in hindsight, and same thing on the state. And one thing that I've often thought about during just thinking about court in general, people often talk about how defendants are not represented adequately, or there's a bad result because of the attorney not doing X, Y, and Z. Well, likewise for the state. I can't think of the number of cases that I've seen that have been poorly prosecuted. And if they'd been prosecuted differently, that person would have been found guilty. And so it works both ways. We have an adversarial system. We do have, it's a human system, so mistakes are made. But I think overall, it's the best in the world. And, if you can point me to one that's better, I'm all ears. But I think it does work well, given the human frailties that exist in our life.
For sure. You want to play another clip for us?
I mentioned before, it's called either stop sign or red light emotions. And what I mean by that is you can't, if you're truly upset, you can't stop it like that and change direction. And he was upset talking to Daniel and just doing the crying, doing the emotion, heavy breathing, and he stops. And he says, "How are you doing, sir?" You can't do that.
Well, this was an opportunity. This was Captain Jason Chapman really giving us an opportunity to hear what they were thinking, as not only they were replaying the body cam or the interviews, that sort of thing, but also sort of what they were seeing on the spot. And I mean, we got a very candid response from Jason Chapman about that, didn't we, Drew?
We certainly did. I would say we were there over 2 hours speaking to them, and I would say it was probably 15, 20 minutes. It felt like, at least. All sorts of topics, but really, really honing in on, from not just Chapman, but Laura Rutland as well, is honing in on Alex's demeanor and his body language and these visual signals and cues he was giving off. And not just from the night of the murders, but all the way up until he was on the stand. And it was just, the way Chapman described it was a conglomerate. It wasn't just one thing that was off. One thing being off doesn't mean anything. Two things being off doesn't mean anything. But it's just like the circumstantial evidence case that we got here, when you put them all together.
Yeah. Did you get the impression from them that they viewed him more as a suspect or a surviving victim that night?
Well, that was interesting.
Or a combination.
That was interesting. Chapman told us he was one of the first ones to say, hey, we shouldn't rule this guy out, just because of what he was observing. But he said that was initially met from his peers a little bit. Whoa! Are you sure you want to go there? Right. Because not from any deference or what you call it, or any favoritism to Murdaugh.
Right.
Just again, going back to the whole overarching theme of how absurd and bizarre was this case.
Yeah.
Like that a husband and father would do this.
Yeah.
But initially, Chapman says he was one of the only ones that was kind of reading that body language, taking that broad picture of inconsistencies and things that weren't right, and reading into it. And he said within about 72 hours, he wasn't the only one, because they had the
It
luxury.
changed
Yeah, he had the
after the
luxury of going
interviews.
back
Yeah,
and
yeah.
seeing the videos.
Yeah. And did you have the impression from him that those that thought he was more of a victim, and this sounds harsh, but I think the reality is that husbands do kill wives, you know, and that does happen with the unfortunately in life. But did you have the feeling that the killing of the son made it like, hey, he really couldn't have done this type thinking?
Yes. But do we have that soundbite? I believe we do. If we do, Anne, can you check? But there's a really great one from Laura Rutland where she's talking about looking into his body language. And it meant so much in the aftermath of how Alec was fixated on Paul. Alec was fixated on Paul and was just constantly looking at him, but he wouldn't look at Maggie. And you're tonight, plug for our live news or our upcoming broadcast. Anne's going to go into this tonight with more from this interview. But it in a word, yes. And it was only after the fact where, again, they talk into this body language, what he was doing, what he wasn't doing, that kind of opened eyes.
Well, and who he was fixated on. That was a big part of what they talked to us about as well, was their job is to observe, right? So they're not, as Jason said, in the interview, Captain Chapman was like, we're not creating evidence. We're not, we're gathering evidence and we are absorbing what we're seeing around us, but we're not creating anything. So what's there is there, and what's not there is also a huge part of it. And we heard that echoed in the prosecution's opening statements even. And I think what was not there was some of the emotion that they were expecting to see from somebody like that. And at one point, Jason said, I felt like, they don't, one of the things is, he doesn't take it personally. They never do. But after a while, when these guys are sitting at this crime scene and they're looking at all of this, they're wandering around and they're picking up the tarp and examining these bodies, these victims, these gruesome murders. Usually the person who is there found them, that sort of thing, they get very angry at the officers. Oh. They get very angry. They want to know, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you going out and finding the killers? Why aren't you this? Why aren't you that? And that just never happened. And I think that was one of the big clues to Chapman. We may have that clip as well. But let's listen to some more clips so we can see exactly what we have.
Last thing that was the nail in the coffin for me on scene was that he never got angry. And people say, well, why would that make you upset? But they always do. We don't take it to heart, we don't get offended, but if we had been out there and it was legitimate, at some point in time, he should have reached a peak moment where he said, why do y'all keep asking me the same questions? Why are you not out there trying to find the killers? Why are you sitting here taking pictures of dirt? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing your job? Never, not even up until he got convicted, he never, ever showed that anger. Oh. And everyone does. They always do.
Yep.
Yeah, kind of makes sense. If they'd been slaughtered by somebody an hour before, right, that they would be in a relative vicinity of Colleton County, and why aren't there roadblocks? Why aren't you out there finding them? It makes sense from a law enforcement perspective. I hadn't thought about that, but very insightful.
A thing that came to my mind thinking about that clip about him not getting angry, a perfect example of it, think back, and I would imagine most everyone here has followed this case enough that you've probably heard it, but if you haven't, there's a 911 call from Gloria Satterfield's death when 2018, and she had whatever happened, the accident at Murdaugh's home, she's fallen, she's badly injured. Paul Murdaugh is on the phone, and EMS is asking Paul all these questions, and he's like, man, why are y'all asking me all these questions? Can y'all hurry up? She's hurt. That's what he's talking about. And they have to explain to him, Paul, we're on the way. Right. Us asking you these questions doesn't change anything. But that's what he's talking about. That legitimate, like, I'm telling you what's happening here. Hurry up, do something. And that all even goes back to the point they made about Buster. And right there in the closing arguments, 40 minutes after the murders, he finally thinks about Buster and getting him to safety and all that.
I felt like John Metters did hone in on exactly what Captain Chapman said in that they must have, it would be fascinating to hear if that's how this all went down with Captain Chapman, because I do know that they spent a long time prepping with the prosecution.
Oh, is that right? Did they spend hours and hours with the prosecutor? Was that done in Columbia or in Walterboro?
I don't know. I'm not quite sure where they did that, but they sat down with him quite a bit. They said they spent a lot of time talking to him, and I felt like I heard that when Metters was doing his.
I did have the feeling they knew each other well. Funny you say that, because oftentimes, and just the nature of the beast, when you're prosecuting cases, you just don't have time to put in like you'd like to for, if not many, probably most cases. And the ones that you can put in time, it sort of shows, because there's a chemistry. And I felt like that case had chemistry for the state. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like they did slide in a lot of this information onto the stand when they could, but you could see how just what we just heard from Captain Chapman, how that really needed to be something that they had a Metters, they had a prosecutor Metters do at the very, very end, where he was allowed to just kind of talk and do the statement, because it would be hard, right, to allow these witnesses to get up on the stand and say anything but the facts, ma'am.
Speculation, right? There would be an objection typically that would be sustained when they've this sort of thing, which is really interesting, but it would be hard to see how it would be admissible, like, hey, he should have been angry, what he said. It gets to some speculation there, so you probably could have tried to slip it in, but I think they were wise not to.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's play another one, because we do have a couple of, I wanted to get as much as we could, so we could give you a...
I think it's odd. No. You know why? It's a staged crime scene. You hear over and over and over again just the bombardment that the AGs didn't have any evidence. It was all circumstantial, and it was primarily circumstantial evidence. But I ask you this, Alex killed his wife and Alex killed his son. And Alex did the best job that Alex could do in the amount of time he had to remove all evidence that would link him to that crime scene. Should we have found a bunch of evidence there? No, it's a cleaned scene.
What he's talking about there, yeah. What he's talking about there, the first question he was responding to, where he said no, should we? He's talking about the guns, the guns theory, and I so badly wanted to ask a follow up on this, and I forgot to do it, and I'll get to that in a second. But what we're getting at there is all this criticism about they didn't find this and they didn't find that and they didn't take care of the crime scene as well as they should have. Their point is, and I even acknowledge this to you, Charlie, when we're going back weeks now when we're talking about this case, and I'm responding to what I'm hearing in the trial about, okay, well, this sounds bad for SLED. This sounds bad for SLED. But at the same time, I'm like, but for these investigators, they don't have any of the evidence they have. And Chapman really brings it home there. Yeah. And he even said this to us again. Yeah, there's every case they work is a learning opportunity. You do things better, but they're honing in on these mistakes. What about all the things they got right? And oh, by the way, the things they got right in spite of Alex's efforts to throw them off the trail and keep them from finding. Like he very cleverly, that was their point. Alex cleaned up the crime scene and
had a pretty good alibi starting off, right? I mean, he wasn't there, right? He was at his mother's house. His ailing and his
And
father
with
went
an
to the
alibi,
hospital. It had a lot of.
we never talked about this, but wasn't somewhere that we heard that he had an ironclad alibi, or did I write that in a script?
I went
at
back
some
and
point?
because I remember I didn't follow this as closely as y'all did, but I do remember like there was this information out there, I presume from the defense, that yeah, he had a solid alibi. They put the notice of alibi in and said we weren't there, and and on the face of it, until you were able to, as we saw after weeks of testimony on this very point, you were able to show that it really wasn't an alibi. He could have done it quite easily. In fact, did do it quite, as they proved. Before I forget to ask you, I need to see if they brought this up. Did they talk at all about one of the criticisms that's out there is, well, they should have gone into the home and preserved that, and also gone to Alameda. Did they get into that at all as to why there was pretty much a free-for-all in the main house that night?
No, they did not. I feel like they did talk about that a little bit, but as far as trying to justify it or defend it or explain it, by that point it was Sled's case.
I see.
And
so they were subservient
That's what I was going to say. There was definitely a line in the sand where they had to say, we are now assisting Sled. Laura Rutland, who knows absolutely zero about the Moselle or the Murdaughs, she is going to be our liaison because she is the only one that has absolutely no knowledge or connection to the Murdaughs.
Oh, is that right? I thought Sheriff Hill made just a commendable decision that very night to call in Sled and to recuse himself. I mean it showed some courage there and some leadership. It was like
one of the first conversation that Chapman had with Sheriff Hill. He actually went through that conversation with us and said, he heard it come across basically as Daniel Greene is driving there. He's hearing what dispatch is saying, and he's literally putting on his clothes and his coat or whatever and headed out the door. And that's when Sheriff Buddy Hill calls and is like, hey, do you know where you're going? Do you realize who this is? And they're like, dispatch is saying this is Alex Murdaugh.
Yeah, and
so he knows pretty quickly,
right.
We're going to have to
and I'm sure
bring in
your
Sled
typical
right
investigator would like a juicy case like that. I mean, I hate to put it that way because it's horrible that what happened, but they typically want to investigate these major cases. So I thought it was really commendable that he did that. And, it was just a real credit to Sheriff Hill.
And the other part to that is they told us up front, and not that we would ask them to do this, but they told us up front, like, listen, we're not gonna talk about Sled. We're not gonna talk about what Sled did. We're not Sled. We're not, and we're also not gonna criticize what another law enforcement agency did because there is so much. There's context that we can't give you, and that it's up to them to give you. And it becomes an issue of. You want to say professional courtesy is a little bit of a underrepresentation of what I'm trying to get there, but it's professionalism in general. Because they're not going to get in there and tell us everything that Sled did wrong or speculate about what.
But they did give you some explanations for some things, didn't they? For example, I don't know if we need to talk about that now, but I thought the booty was. Tell me about that. I thought that was
we
some
could
news
run through
there.
a few of those.
Well, the booty being the first one, they talked about how the defense brought in expert Ken Zersi, I believe it was a crime scene expert from university, and if you're going into that feed room and documenting evidence, they should have been wearing booties. They should have been like the cloth cover, not cloth, but
the protective shoe coverings.
Yeah, you all know the material we're talking about. They're almost like
paper.
Paper type material. And Chapman's point was, okay, think about what is all over that crime scene. Outside of it, where are we going to put the booties on? We have to put the booties on outside of the crime scene. What's outside of the crime, or not outside of the crime scene, excuse me. We have to put the booties on outside of the feed room. What's outside of the feed room? Water and blood everywhere. The moment you put those booties on and start stepping, you're going to be stepping in more water and blood. The paper's going to absorb it, and then you're going to track it all in the feed room. So what's less likely to contaminate and smear and degrade the crime scene, but a rubber-soled shoe?
Makes sense to me. What did they say about the fingerprints?
That was interesting.
They said that they did look for fingerprints, and they even pointed out how that there's one of the accepted ways to search for fingerprints is alternative light sources. And they said they did. and they didn't find anything.
Wow.
But you can't photograph a flashlight going on and off. You can't photograph.
And that was the sheriff's office that did that, or was that SLED?
That was the sheriff's office.
Initially, when they got there.
So they were looking for all of these fingerprints, but they're not going to be able to show us in evidence.
I see that they did that. At that stage, were they working under SLED's direction, or were they on their own at that point?
They were assisting.
Yeah.
They were assisting SLED by that point, yes. But they were, that's standard protocol. Like they were there in a support role. They turned it over and they were there in a support role, and they needed to be there. And until SLED's crime scene got there, which we heard was hours later, I feel like.
It was, yeah.
But that's a great, that's a great example, Charlie, of what you were just talking about, of picking your battles and what do you actually bring into the trial? Because to me, that was actually pretty important. Like, well, where are the fingerprints? Why didn't you look for them? That bothered me to some degree, just from a layman's perspective. But as a prosecutor, what are you supposed to do when you hear, we checked, we did that alternative light source, you're not going to see, we can't photograph that for you.
You know, I remember that day, what they might have been thinking, they might not have brought it up in their case in chief, and who knows, there was so much information, maybe they just simply forgot, or maybe they didn't think it was important. But in rebuttal, I suppose they could have, but I thought the witnesses they had in rebuttal that day were so powerful. I mean, each one after the other. They may have thought this was good, but didn't meet that standard that they had, because I remember that day, I just thought the case was just really solidified by their choice of what everyone was, I thought, just a killer witness for the state. So maybe that was the thinking.
That makes sense. Well, should we play another clip? We probably have time for a couple more. I've got some more points, of course.
Really uncomfortable not making him a part of the scene. Not that he was the shooter at the time, or not that he, was the only shooter at the time, but really, really, really hard for me with everything I had absorbed up to that point, excluding him from being involved.
Well, and of course, that's him is Alex Murdaugh, and that's Captain Chapman saying, everything he was seeing, and he made it very clear,
Yeah, he had him as, David Owens testified he had him in the circle from day one, of course, but it sounds like he had him in the middle of the circle.
Yeah, I mean, he said that every time it was the demeanor. He kept on going back to the demeanor and the body language that he was really, really studying. All three of them talked about it. They all three talked about that body language were things that they just couldn't get past. Like the fact that he, this ability to turn on and off the emotions like this. That he always seemed to be kind of looking off.
Yeah, he did that. Remember we testified to on his direct examination and cross-examination? I felt that about him too. And also, as I sat behind him, a couple rows behind him during the trial, you could sort of sense there was you had to say it's acting, because who knows what's going through someone's head really. But looking back, I can appreciate what he's saying, because it did seem like there was a off and on switch there. That most people don't have. It's more of a continuum, but his was definitely off and on.
Well, and Laura Rutland made this extraordinary comment that it was Paul, while he was describing what he was seeing and what he was doing through this experience, was it that he, speculating sort of, was this the trauma of seeing Paul?
Right.
Or was he now traumatized by what he had done to Paul? And it was also the idea that he was looking off as he was telling them, because he was retelling a story that he was comfortable with. This is the way they described it. But when they would ask him a question that was off the cuff or off his script, he would turn his head or look the other way. And they said his body language kept on telling.
Did they have many conversations with him that weren't on body cam? You can cut those things off.
Chapman did.
Really?
Chapman
They cut
did.
the body cam off and talk?
Yes,
What did
and
he say?
that was, we talked about that like 2 days ago. That was one of the first things that we put on the air, and we can, we will have a link to that in some of these stories. But go ahead, Drew, tell them about that.
Yeah, so the part that we got from Chapman that didn't happen in front of a camera, he was questioning Murdaugh. And Murdaugh told him the story about Paul's phone. And Chapman says Murdaugh told him that he removed Paul's phone from Paul's pocket. It didn't fall out. And not only that, he picked it up and said he was, Chapman says this, he can he gives it better credit. He said Alec told him I was looking at his phone. I was looking for Evan, and he stopped himself.
What?
And then I realized I shouldn't do that, and I put it back down. And that story changed. That story changed when he got in the car with David Owen and Laura Rutland. Max, I believe we have Laura Rutland's comment from Laura Rutland, more talking about just this in general, but the changing stories, the not making eye contact, the on and off emotions. Again, that's what we got to in the very beginning, the whole picture.
You want to play that?
You know, when he was describing Paul and breaking down, I initially thought this was genuine emotion and genuine trauma. Of course, now I know, yeah, he was traumatized, but not by what he had found. He was traumatized with what he had done.
Well, that's such an honest answer, isn't it? That she was tricked, basically. But who wouldn't be? That's the one thing I think it's really maybe hard for some to appreciate. But, you know, I didn't know him, but knew the family. And so the thinking of, and had otherwise, you know, the boat crash, I think, sort of dinging the reputation, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. But just generally speaking, they'd enjoyed a good one, wouldn't you say, just generally speaking, in Colleton, Hampton County, that part of the state. Yeah. And so, you know, when you go to something like this from a law enforcement standpoint, naturally, I think the emotion would be like, hey, the man just lost his wife and son to these horrible killers. Mm-hmm. We need to be sensitive to where we are with this. Absolutely. And I think it's completely understandable. So those that kind of just jump on like, well, they should have locked down the whole place. And I'm not saying that in hindsight they shouldn't have, and I'm not saying that maybe at that time they in fact should have, but I think it's completely understandable to be cognizant of the possibility that he in fact could be a surviving victim. That's all I'm saying.
Well, and this leads us to another point that's very, very important is, of course, the state needed or felt they could set up a strong motive with these financial crimes of distracting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, none of that was public, right? Other words, we all now know about that. But at the time, he was not accused of stealing. We didn't know about the drug use.
They didn't know anything about
We did have the civil boat crash, but that was it.
Yeah, that all of that financial crime came in afterwards, and that was extraordinary. But but they had a different take on whether or not this was totally premeditated, because we asked them about that. And it's something that I go into with my story. The state needed this motive, right? The officers on the scene, as they looked at this evidence, what they knew about what had happened, the two guns, the brutality of the murders, they were not convinced that this was premeditated at all. That it was that planned is basically the way.
More of a spur of the moment type.
It was
possibility.
He kind of got into it. Something happened. The way Laura describes it is that she saw that things were snowballing. The storm that was approaching, as the prosecutor said, all of that is true. All of that makes sense. But something happened at the end of that day.
You know,
that
funny.
Made him
you know,
snap.
it's interesting you point that out, because I thought John Meadows brilliantly handled that as closing argument. We think this is the motivation, these financial crimes, but remember how he said in his closing? Who knows? You could have just snapped. We don't have to prove motive. So, regardless, he did it. And I thought that was maybe a good way to present that to 12 jurors that worked.
Yeah, you don't have to tie that so strongly.
You don't have to believe our motive theory to convict him of murder. He could have just, I think he said something like, he could have just snapped, he could have been angry. But the malice aforethought only had to be at the moment of the act or instantaneous with that. I thought he was brilliant in the way of not forcing them to agree to the motive theory in order to bring back a verdict.
Well, and Chapman really, you know, the reason we got off on this as well during the interview when we were talking about it was that we were talking about the guns. It's like, well, you had two guns. Didn't you wonder? Weren't you wondering? Wasn't that weird? Like, how did the two guns? And he's like, everybody got stuck on these two guns. But when you live out in the country, right, Drew? You got a, what did he say? You got one for snakes? In case somebody gets into the feed, you got to have a gun for the snakes.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, right?
One for the hogs.
Right.
We've all gone through that.
The hogs.
Yeah.
I mean, we have definitely heard about how wild it was out there.
A lot of weapons.
He was like, he didn't have to have two two guns slung to his back, and he's, some kind of Rambo style going through this.
And I thought I heard from somebody too that Paul's, correct me if I'm wrong, but his truck was in the shop. And the thinking was that he actually took the weapons out and had them by the feeds room or something. So it could have been readily available.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that.
Yep, and also that Alec used the golf cart, and there was always, if they were riding around, they would have a even on that golf cart. It was so much. There was so much room for reasonable options there of how the guns could have ended up right there without him coming up tactically, just surprising them out of nowhere with a rifle slung over his back and a shotgun in his hand.
It wasn't that planned out.
Yeah,
basically.
that's their idea.
The guns were there. The ability to do it was there, and this somehow sort of fell together.
Yeah. Makes sense. Could have been that way.
And we've heard this before, but what if not to throw any more heat on Bubba, because Lord knows that dog's gotten enough. But
and Bubba's living with the housekeeper, right? Did I read that somewhere?
With Blanca, he lives with her.
Wow.
But
what a symmetry again to this case.
What if the final straw was that dog killing the chicken? What if it was as simple as that? I think that's a little bit too reductive, but that's kind of the point that they're trying to make is.
But it's the confluence of events, right?
Yeah.
It could have been
so
at
true.
the very end.
Yeah.
Just somebody said something wrong to him, and some remark didn't settle well with him after a bad day.
Well, if he's strung out on the opioids, right, and has the paranoia feelings, and as Judge Newman said so eloquently, that he might have been a different person then, still responsible.
Well, and to put the pills in the pocket, remember when he said, I had pills in the pocket while I was talking to Daniel Greene.
Wow.
So, of course, we asked him, Daniel Greene, did you see pills in the pocket? He was like, well, I did. I was tapping him down, but I didn't, nothing obviously was like, rattling in his pockets. But Laura actually pointed out, Laura Rutland pointed out, watch him take his phone out of his pocket when he was in the car for the SLED interviews. There was just a phone in there. That's what she was saying to us. So there was so much there, and I wish we could just talk to you all afternoon about it. But we're going to have to probably break this up a little bit. I have a feeling that we are going to be revisiting these interviews, and we will have the opportunity to. We don't want to tell everyone quite yet what's to come because we do have some very interesting guests coming up for our podcast.
I'll say.
Coming up in the next couple of weeks. So I really hope everybody stays with us. This was just a great opportunity to just sit down with you, Charlie, and just let you hear a little bit what we were hearing.
Oh, yeah, and can I plug my Judge Newman Fan Club coffee mug that Katie Solt, the terrific anchor here, so kindly gave me. There's going to be more available for those that are interested, but they're very handsome. It's got a wonderful picture of Judge Newman, and it says, what else could it say other than bring the jury? So anyone interested, let us know, and we're going to order, I think, hundreds more. So please let us know.
You are going to need hundreds more. So it says Judge Newman Fan Club for our listeners out there that don't get the privilege of our audio, our video clips. It says Judge Newman Fan Club. It's got a fantastic picture of Newman, and then underneath it says bring the jury, which will probably ring in my ears for years to come.
I'd like a personalized one where he says, "Sit down, Mr. Griffin."
He had a couple of really good moments in there. That is absolutely right. We'll send that to Jim. No. I appreciate your time today, and
my
pleasure. We will be back very soon. Actually, you will see us again next week with more on post-trial of the Murdaughs.